The gunshot cracked through the peaceful Texas afternoon like thunder from a cloudless sky. Commander Jake Morrison's 12-year-old daughter Emma had been walking their gentle Brahman bull Thunder down Meadowbrook's tree-lined street when Deputy Ryan Blackwood's service weapon discharged 3 devastating rounds into the massive animal's chest. Thunder wasn't attacking. The 900-pound therapy bull had simply stepped protectively in front of Emma when the agitated officer approached. Now the magnificent creature lay motionless on the sun-warmed asphalt, his enormous body crushing the white picket fence, crimson spreading beneath his silver-gray hide. Emma's scream tore through the suburban silence, raw and primal, as she collapsed beside Thunder's massive head. Neighbors burst from their homes, cell phones capturing the unthinkable scene. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson dropped her watering can, the metallic clang echoing off silent houses as she fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers. The same Thunder who had comforted Emma through nightmares after her mother's death now lay dying, his gentle brown eyes finding hers one final time. Deputy Blackwood stood frozen, smoke still curling from his barrel, unaware that he had just destroyed the daughter of Delta Force's most lethal operative. What had he done? And what would happen when Commander Morrison returned home? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 2 months before that devastating gunshot shattered their world, the Morrison family had found something resembling peace in the rolling hills of Meadowbrook, Texas. Their 5-acre ranch property sat on the outskirts of this affluent suburb where manicured lawns gave way to open pastures and the endless blue sky stretched unbroken to the horizon. Emma Morrison had been 12 for exactly 3 weeks when they moved here, her 13th birthday still months away, though grief had aged her far beyond her years. 18 months earlier, cancer had stolen her mother Sarah, leaving behind a father who fought wars in distant countries and a daughter who barely spoke above a whisper. The move to Texas represented Commander Jake Morrison's desperate attempt to give his daughter something he couldn't provide himself: stability, healing, hope. Thunder had been Dr. Jennifer Walsh's idea. The local veterinarian, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and endless patience, specialized in animal-assisted therapy for traumatized children. When Jake had brought Emma to her office, the girl had sat motionless in the corner chair, staring at nothing, responding to questions with barely perceptible nods. Some children connect with smaller animals, Dr. Walsh had explained, watching Emma through the window as she stood frozen beside Jake's truck. But Emma's trauma runs deep. She needs something substantial, something that can absorb her pain without breaking. Thunder had been 4 years old then, a magnificent Brahman bull with a temperament so gentle that children half Emma's age could safely approach him. Standing nearly 6 feet at the shoulder and weighing close to 900 pounds, he possessed the physical presence to make anyone feel protected. Yet his dark eyes held an intelligence and kindness that drew traumatized souls like a beacon. The first time Emma had seen Thunder, she had actually gasped, the first sound Jake had heard her make voluntarily in months. The massive bull had been lying in the shade of an old oak tree, his distinctive humped back rising and falling with each peaceful breath. His long, floppy ears twitched as flies buzzed around his face, and when Emma had slowly approached, Thunder had simply watched her with those wise, patient eyes. "He knows," Dr. Walsh had whispered to Jake as they watched Emma place her small hand on Thunder's enormous flank. "Animals like Thunder have an instinct about pain. He recognizes a wounded soul." Within weeks, Thunder had become Emma's constant companion. The certified therapy animal wore a special halter with identification tags marking him as essential to Emma's treatment. He learned to respond to her whispered commands, to lower his massive head so she could reach his ears, to stand perfectly still while she climbed onto his broad back when the world became too overwhelming. Jake had purchased the Meadowbrook property specifically to accommodate Thunder's needs: wide pastures, a small barn, and enough space for Emma to heal alongside her gentle giant. The mortgage stretched his military salary thin, but watching his daughter slowly return to life made every sacrifice worthwhile. Here in Texas, surrounded by Thunder's unconditional love, Emma had begun to speak again. The trouble began on a sweltering Tuesday evening in late August when Patricia Hendricks stood before the Meadowbrook City Council, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights as she clutched a thick folder of photographs and medical reports. The council chambers, typically half-empty for routine meetings, buzzed with an unusual energy as concerned parents filled every available seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "we face an unprecedented threat to our children's safety right here in our own community." She opened her folder with theatrical precision, revealing enlarged photographs of Thunder grazing peacefully in the Morrison pasture. "This animal weighs nearly half a ton and lives within 500 yards of Meadowbrook Elementary School." Jake Morrison sat in the back row, his military training keeping his expression neutral despite the growing knot in his stomach. Beside him, Emma fidgeted with Thunder's therapy animal certification papers, her small hands trembling slightly as she recognized the tension in the room. Patricia's crusade had personal roots that ran deep into tragedy. 13 months earlier, her 8-year-old son, Bradley, had been kicked by a horse at a riding lesson, suffering a compound fracture that required 3 surgeries and left him with a permanent limp. The accident had transformed Patricia from a casual volunteer into a fierce advocate for what she termed residential animal safety protocols. "My son will never run normally again," Patricia continued, her voice breaking with calculated emotion. "And every day I watch him struggle with simple activities that other children take for granted. We cannot allow other families to experience this heartbreak when we have the power to prevent it." Councilmember David Foster, a rancher himself, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mrs. Hendricks, the Morrison property is properly zoned for agricultural use. They've followed all county regulations regarding livestock housing and care." "County regulations written 50 years ago," Patricia shot back, "before this community became home to over 3,000 families with young children, before we built our elementary school. The proximity of such a massive animal to our children constitutes a clear and present danger." The photographs she displayed had been taken with a telephoto lens, making Thunder appear larger and more menacing than reality. In one image, he stood at the pasture fence, his impressive bulk filling the frame as children walked past on the sidewalk beyond. The perspective distorted the actual distance, nearly 200 yards, making it appear as though Thunder loomed directly over the school pathway. Jake raised his hand to speak, his voice steady and respectful. "Council members, I'd like to address these concerns directly. Thunder is a certified therapy animal, registered with both the state of Texas and the American Therapy Animal Association. He's undergone extensive behavioral testing and has never shown aggression toward any person, child, or adult." "Certifications can't change basic animal instincts," Patricia interrupted. "Bulls are inherently unpredictable. One moment of startle, one loud noise, and that creature could charge into a crowd of children." Emma stood slowly, her young voice barely audible in the large chamber. "Thunder saved me from a rattlesnake last month," she said, her words gaining strength as she continued. "He stepped between me and the snake and wouldn't move until Daddy came. He's not mean. He's my best friend." The room fell silent as Emma's simple testimony cut through Patricia's rhetoric. Several council members leaned forward, studying the small girl who had spoken with such quiet conviction. Dr. Jennifer Walsh rose from her seat in the middle section. "If I may address the council," she said, her professional credentials lending weight to her words, "I've worked with therapy animals for over 20 years, and Thunder represents the finest example of human-animal bonding I've ever witnessed." Emma Morrison suffered severe trauma following her mother's death. Thunder's presence has been instrumental in her psychological recovery. Patricia's face flushed red. "Are you suggesting that one child's emotional needs outweigh the physical safety of hundreds of other children? What happens when that bull breaks free and charges toward the playground?" "Brahman bulls are actually among the most docile cattle breeds," Dr. Walsh replied calmly. "Thunder's temperament testing scores placed him in the 95th percentile for gentleness and predictability. He's statistically safer than most family dogs." The debate raged for another hour, with parents taking sides based on their own experiences and fears. Those who had met Thunder spoke of his gentle nature, while others, influenced by Patricia's presentation, worried about hypothetical disasters. Council member Sarah Chen finally called for order. "We'll take this matter under advisement and schedule a formal hearing for next month. All interested parties will have opportunity to present evidence and testimony regarding the proposed livestock proximity ordinance." As the meeting adjourned, Jake noticed several deputies in the back of the room taking notes. Deputy Ryan Blackwood, a man in his mid-30s with prematurely gray hair and intense eyes, watched Emma with particular interest as she walked past, her small hand trustingly placed in her father's larger one. 3 weeks after the contentious city council meeting, the first anonymous complaint arrived at the Meadowbrook Sheriff's Department on a gray Monday morning that carried the promise of autumn storms. Deputy Ryan Blackwood read the handwritten report with particular interest, his weathered fingers tracing each word as memories he'd spent years suppressing clawed their way back to the surface. "Aggressive bull on Morrison property charged at morning joggers," the complaint stated in careful block letters. "Animal appeared agitated and dangerous. Immediate action required before someone gets hurt." Blackwood's partner, Deputy Marcus Webb, studied the report over his shoulder, noting how Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. At 40 years old, Marcus had partnered with Blackwood for 3 years, long enough to recognize the signs of his colleagues' growing obsession with the Morrison family and their massive bull. "Could be nothing," Marcus offered, though his own motivations ran deeper than simple professional skepticism. "Anonymous complaints usually are." But Ryan Blackwood saw something entirely different in those typed words, validation for the nightmares that had plagued him since childhood, when an afternoon of playing cowboy on his grandfather's ranch had nearly cost him his life. He had been 8 years old, the same age as Emma Morrison, when the family's prize Angus bull had trampled him in a fit of rage triggered by a carelessly thrown rock. The beast's hooves had shattered 3 ribs and left permanent scars across his chest, marks that served as daily reminders of how quickly gentle animals could become killers. The psychological trauma had only deepened 16 years later, when Ryan's father, attempting to separate 2 fighting bulls, had been gored and killed before Ryan's horrified eyes. The image of his father's broken body lying in the blood-soaked dirt had crystallized Ryan's belief that large animals were inherently dangerous, ticking time bombs waiting for the right moment to unleash their primitive fury. His military service in Afghanistan had provided temporary escape from these demons, but excessive force incidents involving civilians had led to his dishonorable discharge and return to Texas, where childhood fears merged with adult authority to create a dangerous combination. The sight of Emma Morrison walking confidently beside 900 pounds of potential destruction triggered every protective instinct and traumatic memory Ryan possessed. Marcus Webb understood obsession differently, but just as intimately. 3 years earlier, his 6-year-old son Timothy had begged for horseback riding lessons, and Marcus had reluctantly enrolled him at a stable outside town. The accident had been swift and devastating. Timothy thrown from a spooked mare, his small neck broken instantly upon impact with a fence post. Marcus's wife had blamed him for allowing their son near such dangerous animals, and their marriage had crumbled beneath the weight of grief and recrimination. Now, watching children play near any large animal filled Marcus with a mixture of protective fury and survivor's guilt that made him the perfect enabler for Ryan's increasingly erratic behavior. "We should check it out," Ryan said, his voice carrying an edge that Marcus recognized as barely controlled anxiety. "Standard procedure for animal complaints." They drove to the Morrison property in tense silence, Ryan's knuckles white on the steering wheel as they approached the pasture where Thunder grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. The massive bull stood beneath an oak tree, his distinctive humped back and long ears marking him unmistakably as a Brahmin, but to Ryan, all bulls carried the same potential for violence. "Jesus," Ryan whispered, his breathing becoming shallow as they parked near the fence line. "Look at the size of that thing." Thunder raised his enormous head, studying the patrol car with mild curiosity before returning his attention to the grass at his feet. His movements were deliberate and calm, showing none of the agitation described in the anonymous complaint, but Ryan's traumatized mind saw threat in every gesture. "Animals just eating," Marcus observed, though his own discomfort was evident in the way he gripped his door handle, ready to retreat at the first sign of movement. Ryan's radio crackled to life with routine traffic, but the sudden noise caused Thunder to look up again, and that simple head movement sent Ryan into a full panic response. His heart hammered against his ribs as sweat beaded on his forehead, and for a terrifying moment he was 8 years old again, staring up at death incarnate bearing down on him with murderous intent. "We need to document this," Ryan said, his voice tight with forced professionalism as he reached for his camera. "Standard photos for the report." Over the following days, more anonymous complaints trickled in, each describing increasingly dramatic encounters with Thunder's alleged aggression. A woman claimed the bull had rushed the fence when she walked past with her baby stroller. A jogger reported being chased for 50 yards before Thunder supposedly lost interest. Each report painted the picture of an animal growing more dangerous by the day. Jake Morrison, however, noticed a disturbing pattern in the complaints. His military training and intelligence analysis revealed inconsistencies in timing, language, and reported locations that suggested coordination rather than random incidents. More troubling still, his security cameras showed no evidence of the described encounters, recording only Thunder's typical gentle behavior as neighbors passed by without incident. The breaking point came when Ryan Blackwood volunteered for every patrol shift that took him past the Morrison property. His obsessive surveillance became so obvious that other deputies began commenting on his fixation with "that bull situation." Marcus covered for his partner's increasingly erratic behavior, filing reports that supported the narrative of a dangerous animal threatening public safety. Dr. Jennifer Walsh received her own anonymous complaint the following week, alleging that she had falsified Thunder's therapy certification and endangered children through professional negligence. The Veterinary Licensing Board launched an investigation that threatened her practice and reputation, adding another layer of pressure to the growing campaign against Thunder's presence in Meadowbrook. As Patricia Hendricks prepared for the scheduled city council hearing, she found unexpected allies in the sheriff's department, where mounting reports of Thunder's aggression provided powerful ammunition for her livestock proximity ordinance. The pieces were falling into place for a legal solution to what she viewed as an unacceptable risk to community safety. But in the shadows of bureaucratic maneuvering and political pressure, Ryan Blackwood's psychological deterioration accelerated, fueled by nightly dreams of charging bulls and daily confrontations with his own buried trauma. Emma Morrison's science fair project changed everything. 2 weeks before the City Council's final hearing on the Livestock Proximity Ordinance, She stood nervously before her sixth-grade class at Meadowbrook Elementary, her poster board decorated with photographs that told the story of an extraordinary friendship between a small girl and a gentle giant. My best friend Thunder had taken Emma 3 weeks to complete with her father's quiet encouragement and Dr. Walsh's professional guidance. The presentation included behavioral charts documenting Thunder's responses to various stimuli, veterinary records proving his docile temperament, and a collection of photographs that captured moments of pure trust between child and animal. In one image, Emma sat reading beneath Thunder's massive bulk as he provided shade on a sunny afternoon. In another, the bull stood perfectly still while Emma braided flowers into his halter, his enormous head lowered to her level with infinite patience. Thunder weighs 897 pounds, Emma began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her beloved companion. That's more than 4 grown men put together. But he's also the gentlest soul I've ever known. When I have nightmares about Mama, Thunder knows before I even wake up. He'll put his big head against my bedroom window and make this soft, rumbling sound that means everything's going to be okay. Her classmates listened with rapt attention as Emma described Thunder's intelligence and emotional sensitivity. She explained how he could distinguish between different types of crying, tears of sadness versus tears of pain, and would respond accordingly, either offering comfort or alerting adults to potential danger. She showed videos taken on her father's phone of Thunder carefully navigating around smaller animals in the pasture, his massive hooves placed with surgical precision to avoid stepping on chickens or cats. The culmination of her presentation was a live video call to the ranch, where Thunder stood in his pasture responding to Emma's commands transmitted through her tablet. When she asked him to say hello, the enormous bull lowered his head toward the camera and released a gentle rumble that made several children giggle with delight. When she asked him to show off, Thunder performed a slow, graceful bow that demonstrated both his intelligence and his trust in Emma's guidance. Mrs. Carolyn Stewart, Emma's teacher, had tears in her eyes as the presentation concluded. The veteran educator had taught hundreds of children over 3 decades, but she had never witnessed such a profound bond between a student and their therapy animal. Emma's confidence had blossomed throughout the school year, transforming her from a silent, withdrawn child into an articulate young advocate for animal-human relationships. The project won first place in the elementary division, but its impact extended far beyond academic recognition. Parents who attended the science fair that evening left with a dramatically different understanding of Thunder's role in the community. Many had been swayed by Patricia Hendrick's campaign of fear, but seeing Emma's documentation of Thunder's gentle nature challenged their preconceptions about large animals. Local news reporter Jessica Chen attended the science fair at the invitation of school officials who recognized the story's broader significance. Her segment, which aired on the evening news 3 days later, featured extensive footage of Emma and Thunder together, highlighting the therapeutic benefits of their relationship while addressing community concerns about safety. "This isn't just about one girl and her bull," Jessica reported, as the camera showed Thunder gently accepting treats from Emma's small hands. "It's about how we balance individual needs with community fears, and whether exceptional circumstances deserve exceptional consideration." The news coverage sparked a wave of support that surprised even Jake Morrison. Letters poured into the city council from veterinarians across Texas endorsing Thunder's therapy certification. Child psychologists wrote detailed explanations of why separating Emma from Thunder could cause severe psychological damage. Animal behavior experts provided scientific evidence supporting the gentleness of properly socialized Brahman bulls. Dr. Margaret Foster, a renowned child trauma specialist from Dallas, drove to Meadowbrook specifically to observe Emma and Thunder together. Her subsequent letter to the city council carried particular weight, given her reputation as an expert witness in custody cases involving therapy animals. In 25 years of practice, Dr. Foster wrote, "I have never observed such a profound therapeutic bond between a traumatized child and her support animal. Thunder's presence has been instrumental in Emma's recovery from severe grief and anxiety. Removing this animal would constitute a form of secondary trauma that could undo years of psychological healing." But the positive momentum faced fierce resistance from Deputy Ryan Blackwood, whose obsessive monitoring of the Morrison property had escalated into something approaching stalking. He drove past their ranch multiple times during each shift, photographing Thunder from various angles and documenting the bull's every movement. His patrol car became a familiar sight along Meadowbrook's country roads, though Thunder's behavior remained consistently calm regardless of the deputy's presence. Marcus Webb watched his partner's deterioration with growing unease. Ryan had begun drinking heavily after shifts, muttering about dangerous animals and stupid people who don't understand the risks. His police reports became increasingly embellished, describing Thunder's normal behaviors in terms that suggested imminent threat. When Thunder approached the fence to investigate passing joggers, Ryan characterized it as aggressive charging. When the bull stood up from a resting position, it became hostile posturing toward civilians. The anonymous complaints continued to arrive at the sheriff's department, each more dramatic than the last. Someone claimed Thunder had broken through his fence and wandered onto school property, though security cameras showed no such incident. Another report described the bull bellowing threateningly at children, despite Thunder's characteristically quiet demeanor. The complaints created an official paper trail that supported the narrative of an increasingly dangerous animal, even though none could be substantiated with evidence. Patricia Hendricks seized upon these reports as vindication of her concerns. At community meetings leading up to the city council hearing, she presented thick folders documenting what she termed Thunder's escalating aggression. The fabricated complaints, combined with Ryan's official incident reports, created a compelling case for immediate action. "How many more complaints do we need before someone gets hurt?" Patricia demanded at a heated town hall meeting. "This animal has already shown aggressive behavior toward multiple community members. Are we waiting for a child to be trampled before we act?" Jake Morrison found himself fighting a two-front war against both official pressure and bureaucratic manipulation. His military contacts helped him identify inconsistencies in the complaint timeline, but civilian authorities showed little interest in his analysis. The sheriff's department dismissed his concerns about Deputy Blackwood's behavior as the desperation of someone facing the loss of his daughter's therapy animal. Meanwhile, Thunder continued his gentle routine, unaware of the political storm swirling around his existence. He grazed peacefully in his pasture, provided comfort to Emma during her difficult moments, and demonstrated the patient intelligence that had made him such an effective therapy animal. Visitors who met Thunder invariably commented on his calm presence and obvious bond with Emma, but their testimonials carried less weight than official incident reports in the bureaucratic process. Dr. Jennifer Walsh faced her own battle as the Veterinary Licensing Board investigated allegations of professional misconduct. The anonymous complaint claimed she had falsified Thunder's behavioral assessments and endangered children through negligent certification. Though she had decades of experience and impeccable credentials, the investigation created a cloud of suspicion that Patricia Hendricks exploited in her public campaign. Even the veterinarian who certified this animal is under investigation for ethical violations, Patricia announced at community meetings. How can we trust that Thunder is safe when the professional who vouched for him is facing charges of negligence? The investigation consumed weeks that Jake and Emma couldn't afford to lose. Each delay worked in favor of those seeking Thunder's removal, creating momentum for the livestock ordinance while undermining confidence in Thunder's therapy certification. Dr. Walsh spent countless hours providing documentation and defending her professional judgment, time that could have been spent advocating for Emma's needs. As the final city council hearing approached, both sides prepared for what everyone understood would be a decisive confrontation. Patricia Hendricks had secured endorsements from parents' groups across the county, while Jake Morrison assembled medical professionals and animal experts willing to testify on Thunder's behalf. The community found itself divided between those who had witnessed Thunder's gentle nature firsthand and those who feared what they perceived as an inherent threat. Emma Morrison, caught in the center of this adult conflict, continued to trust in the bond she shared with Thunder, unaware that forces beyond her understanding were working to destroy the relationship that had saved her from the depths of grief and trauma. The Meadowbrook City Council chambers had never hosted such a contentious hearing. On the evening of September 15th, over 200 community members packed the room beyond capacity, with an overflow crowd gathered outside listening through speakers hastily installed by city staff. The livestock proximity ordinance had become more than local policy. It represented a fundamental clash between individual rights and community fears, between compassion and caution. Patricia Hendricks arrived early, her presentation materials organized in color-coded binders that reflected months of meticulous preparation. She had secured testimony from a pediatric emergency physician who would speak about animal-related injuries, a liability insurance expert who would discuss municipal exposure to lawsuits, and 3 parents whose children had been allegedly frightened by Thunder's presence near school grounds. Jake Morrison sat with Emma in the front row, the girl's small hand clasped tightly in his as she clutched Thunder's therapy certification papers. Dr. Jennifer Walsh sat beside them, her veterinary license having been cleared of all charges just days earlier when investigators found no evidence supporting the anonymous complaints. The vindication had come too late to prevent weeks of professional scrutiny, but it strengthened their position for this crucial hearing. Council Chairman Robert Hayes called the session to order at 7 o'clock sharp, his gavel cutting through the murmur of anxious voices. We're here tonight to consider Ordinance 2023-47, which would prohibit the keeping of livestock animals weighing more than 500 pounds within 500 yards of any educational facility, public playground, or designated walking path. Patricia Hendricks was the first to speak, her presentation polished from weeks of practice at community meetings. She displayed enlarged photographs of Thunder taken with telephoto lenses that emphasized his massive size while minimizing the distance between his pasture and nearby pedestrian areas. Her voice carried the conviction of someone who genuinely believed she was protecting innocent lives. "Honorable council members," she began, "we face a clear choice tonight between one family's desires and our community's safety. The animal in question weighs nearly half a ton and possesses the strength to kill an adult human with a single kick. No amount of training or certification can override basic animal instincts when fear or territorial aggression triggers a violent response." She presented a timeline of alleged incidents, each anonymous complaint elevated to the status of verified fact through repetition and official documentation. The pattern she described painted Thunder as an increasingly unstable animal whose aggressive behaviors were escalating toward inevitable tragedy. 3 weeks ago, Thunder charged at Mrs. Eleanor Patterson while she walked her small dog, Patricia claimed, reading from Deputy Blackwood's incident report. 2 weeks ago, he bellowed threateningly at children passing by on their way to school. Last week, he broke through his fence barrier and wandered onto adjacent property, forcing a jogger to seek shelter behind a tree. Each accusation drew gasps from the audience, though Jake Morrison noted with growing alarm that none of these supposed incidents appeared on his security footage. His property's surveillance system covered every angle where Thunder could interact with the public, yet the recordings showed only peaceful interactions between his bull and passing neighbors. Dr. Richard Pemberton, the pediatric emergency physician Patricia had recruited, testified about the devastating injuries that large animals could inflict on children. His clinical descriptions of trampling wounds, fractured bones, and internal trauma painted a vivid picture of worst-case scenarios that made several parents in the audience visibly uncomfortable. From a medical perspective, Dr. Pemberton concluded, the question isn't whether this particular animal has caused injuries yet, but rather when an incident will occur. The proximity of such a massive creature to areas frequented by children represents an unacceptable risk that this community shouldn't have to bear. Jake Morrison rose to speak when Patricia's side had concluded their presentation, his military bearing commanding immediate attention despite the hostile atmosphere. He moved to the podium with measured steps, his Delta Force training evident in the way he assessed the room before speaking. "Council members," he began, his voice calm and respectful despite the enormous stakes, "you've heard testimony based on fear and speculation. I'd like to present facts backed by documentation and expert analysis." He displayed Thunder's extensive behavioral testing results, conducted by 3 independent animal psychologists over the past 6 months. Every evaluation had placed the bull in the highest categories for gentleness and predictability. Video evidence showed Thunder's interactions with children, elderly residents, and even small animals, demonstrating his consistent calm demeanor regardless of external stimuli. "Thunder has lived in this community for 8 months, Jake continued. During that time, he has had thousands of interactions with pedestrians, joggers, cyclists, and children. Not once has he shown aggressive behavior toward any person. The incidents described in tonight's testimony are contradicted by security footage and witness statements from actual neighbors who interact with Thunder regularly." Dr. Jennifer Walsh followed Jake to the podium, her professional credentials restored and her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in veterinary medicine. She explained the rigorous certification process for therapy animals, the ongoing monitoring required to maintain their status, and the specific behavioral traits that made Brahman bulls particularly suitable for therapeutic work. Thunder's temperament testing places him in the 97th percentile for docility among large animals, Dr. Walsh testified. His stress response indicators are lower than those of most family dogs. The suggestion that he represents a danger to this community contradicts every scientific measure we use to evaluate animal behavior. Emma Morrison's testimony provided the evening's most powerful moment. The 12-year-old approached the microphone with visible nervousness, her small frame dwarfed by the podium, but her voice carried clearly through the chambers as she spoke about the relationship that had saved her from despair. "Thunder knows when I'm sad before I do," Emma said, her words growing stronger as she continued. "When I have nightmares about Mama, he puts his head against my window and makes this soft sound that means I'm safe. He's never hurt anyone, ever. He saved me from a rattlesnake by standing between us until Daddy came. Thunder isn't dangerous. He's the kindest soul I know." The audience sat in absolute silence as Emma described how Thunder had helped her recover from the trauma of losing her mother. She spoke about their daily routines, the games they played, and the comfort he provided during her darkest moments. Several council members wiped their eyes as the girl's simple honesty cut through the evening's political rhetoric. But Patricia Hendricks wasn't finished. During her rebuttal time, she played her strongest card, the official incident reports filed by Deputy Ryan Blackwood. The uniformed officer's testimony carried the weight of law enforcement authority as he described Thunder's allegedly escalating aggressive behaviors. "As a sworn peace officer, I've observed this animal's behavior patterns over several months," Blackwood testified, his voice tight with controlled tension. "The bull displays classic signs of territorial aggression, approaching the fence line whenever citizens pass by and positioning himself in threatening postures. Each incident represents an escalation from the previous one, suggesting that a violent confrontation is inevitable. Marcus Webb corroborated his partner's testimony, describing their professional concern about public safety risks. The two deputies presented a united front that transformed anonymous complaints into official police observations, lending credibility to allegations that couldn't be independently verified. Jake Morrison requested permission to cross-examine the deputies' claims, but Chairman Hayes ruled that the hearing format didn't allow for adversarial questioning. The decision prevented Jake from challenging inconsistencies in the timeline or presenting his security footage that contradicted their allegations. As the testimony phase concluded, the political reality became clear. 3 council members had already announced their support for the ordinance based on legitimate safety concerns raised by law enforcement. 2 others remained uncommitted but expressed sympathy for both sides' arguments. The deciding vote would come from Sarah Chen, a newcomer to the council who had listened intently without revealing her position. Councilmember David Foster, the rancher who understood large animals through personal experience, made a final attempt to find middle ground. Perhaps we could consider a modified ordinance that allows existing therapy animals to remain while preventing new ones from being introduced, he suggested. But Patricia Hendricks rejected any compromise that would allow Thunder to stay. Safety cannot be negotiated, she declared. Either we protect our children from this threat, or we accept responsibility for whatever tragedy follows. The council retired for executive session at 10:30 that evening, leaving the packed chambers to buzz with nervous energy. Emma Morrison sat between her father and Dr. Walsh, her young face pale with exhaustion and worry. Outside, Thunder grazed peacefully in his pasture, unaware that his fate was being decided by people who had never met him. At 11:15, the council returned with their decision. Chairman Hayes's solemn expression revealed the outcome before he spoke the words that would shatter a little girl's world and set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy just 3 days later. The gunshot that ended Thunder's life echoed across Meadowbrook at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a cloudless Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the City Council's devastating 4-3 vote to uphold the livestock proximity ordinance. Emma Morrison had been walking Thunder along their usual route down Elm Street, a daily ritual that had become their shared sanctuary in the weeks following the council's decision to force Thunder's relocation within 30 days. Deputy Ryan Blackwood and his partner, Marcus Webb, had been patrolling the neighborhood with increasing frequency since the ordinance passed, their presence a constant reminder of the ticking clock that hung over Thunder's future in Meadowbrook. Jake Morrison had filed emergency appeals with both state and federal courts, seeking injunctive relief that would allow Thunder to remain during the legal challenge. But the wheels of justice moved slowly, while Thunder's deadline approached with relentless certainty. Emma wore her favorite Future Veterinarian t-shirt that afternoon, a gift from Dr. Walsh that had become her uniform of hope during the darkest days of uncertainty. Thunder walked beside her with his characteristic patience, his massive head lowered to her level as she whispered secrets and worries into his gentle ear. The therapy animal vest he wore bore multiple identification tags certifying his status, though those credentials had proven powerless against political fear and bureaucratic inflexibility. The encounter began innocuously enough. Blackwood's patrol car approached from behind, slowing to match Emma's walking pace as she guided Thunder along the tree-lined sidewalk. The deputy's hands trembled on the steering wheel as childhood trauma merged with present authority, creating a volatile mixture of fear and power that had been building toward this moment for months. "Pull over," Blackwood ordered Webb, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "I want to check on this situation." Webb hesitated, recognizing the signs of his partner's deteriorating mental state, but feeling powerless to intervene. His own grief over his son's death had made him complicit in Blackwood's obsession, two damaged men enabling each other's descent into a darkness that would soon consume an innocent life. They exited the patrol car with deliberate authority, their hands resting casually near their service weapons as they approached Emma and Thunder. The girl looked up with surprise but no fear. Her father had taught her to respect law enforcement while maintaining her own dignity and rights. "Afternoon, Miss Morrison," Blackwood said, his voice carrying an edge that made Thunder's ears twitch with concern. "That's quite a large animal you've got there." "Thunder's just taking his daily walk," Emma replied politely, her small hand secure on the lead rope that connected her to nearly 900 pounds of gentle strength. "We're staying on the sidewalk like always." But Blackwood saw something entirely different. Not a child walking her therapy animal, but a recreation of his worst nightmare. Thunder's massive bulk triggered memories of hooves crushing his 8-year-old chest, of his father's broken body lying in blood-soaked dirt, of every moment when gentle giants had revealed their capacity for sudden, devastating violence. "That animal's too close to the street," Blackwood claimed, though Thunder walked obediently at Emma's side with plenty of clearance from passing traffic. "And too close to school property." Emma glanced around, confusion evident on her young face. They were nearly 3 blocks from Meadowbrook Elementary, well beyond even the contested 500-yard radius that the new ordinance established. "We're not near the school, sir." "And Thunder's completely under control." Thunder sensed the rising tension before Emma did, his large eyes studying the agitated deputy with the intuitive understanding that had made him such an effective therapy animal. The bull shifted slightly, positioning himself between Emma and the source of distress. Not an aggressive move, but the protective instinct that had saved Emma from rattlesnakes and comforted her through countless nightmares. "Did you see that?" Blackwood shouted to his partner, his voice cracking with panic as Thunder's movement triggered a full psychological breakdown. "The animal's positioning to charge. It's showing aggressive behavior." Webb moved to support his partner despite seeing no threat in Thunder's calm repositioning. The bull stood motionless except for the gentle swaying of his tail, his head lowered toward Emma in the submissive posture that characterized their entire relationship. "Sir, Thunder's not being aggressive," Emma said, her voice beginning to show the first signs of fear as she recognized the dangerous shift in the deputy's demeanor. "He's just standing beside me like he always does." But Blackwood was no longer in the present moment. He was 8 years old again, staring up at death incarnate, bearing down on him with murderous intent. Every rational thought dissolved beneath waves of primal terror that transformed Thunder's gentle presence into an existential threat. "Get away from that animal!" Blackwood screamed, drawing his service weapon with shaking hands. "Step away, now!" Emma instinctively moved closer to Thunder, seeking the safety and comfort that his presence had always provided. The movement, natural and innocent, registered in Blackwood's traumatized mind as defiance, as a child placing herself in mortal danger despite his warnings. Thunder remained perfectly still, his intelligent eyes moving between Emma and the agitated men who posed a threat he couldn't understand. The bull's breathing was calm and steady, his posture relaxed despite the rising tension that any animal could sense. He had faced down rattlesnakes to protect Emma, had stood guard through thunderstorms and nightmares, but he had no defense against human madness armed with legal authority. "Please don't hurt Thunder," Emma pleaded, her voice breaking as she realized the terrible direction this encounter was heading. "He's not doing anything wrong. He's just protecting me because he loves me." Those words, "protecting me," shattered the last fragments of Blackwood's rationality. In his fractured perception, Protection meant aggression, love meant possessiveness, and Thunder's gentle stance became a predator's crouch preparing to strike. The first shot rang out at 3:47 p.m. exactly, according to the security camera footage that would later contradict every element of Blackwood's official report. Thunder's massive body jerked as the bullet struck his chest, confusion replacing the calm intelligence in his dark eyes as he looked down at Emma with an expression that seemed to ask why this was happening. Emma screamed, a sound that would haunt the nightmares of every neighbor who heard it, as she reached toward Thunder's wound with desperate hands. The bull's legs buckled beneath his enormous weight, and he collapsed to the sidewalk with a thunderous impact that shook the ground and shattered the fence behind him. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, ensuring that Thunder would never rise again. 900 pounds of gentle spirit collapsed in a growing pool of crimson that spread across the sunny pavement like spilled paint. Thunder's final act was to turn his great head toward Emma, his eyes finding hers with the same loving patience he had shown throughout their brief but profound friendship. Emma threw herself across Thunder's neck, her small body dwarfed by his massive frame as she pressed her hands against the wounds that stole his life. "Please don't leave me," she whispered through tears that mixed with Thunder's blood. "Please, Thunder, don't leave me like Mama did." Thunder's tail moved once, a final gesture of comfort for the child who had given his life meaning. His breathing grew shallow and irregular, as shock and blood loss carried him toward a peace that had been denied him in his final moments. The gentle rumble he had always made to comfort Emma emerged one last time from deep in his chest, growing fainter until it faded into the terrible silence of loss. Deputy Blackwood stood frozen, his weapon still extended, smoke curling from the barrel as the magnitude of his actions began to penetrate his shattered psyche. Around them, neighbors emerged from their homes, their faces reflecting horror and disbelief at the scene that would divide their community forever. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the elderly woman who had often praised Thunder's gentle nature, fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers to call for an ambulance that would arrive too late to save Thunder, but in time to witness a little girl's world dissolving into grief that no therapy could heal. Thunder's eyes dimmed as his massive heart finally stopped, leaving Emma clutching his still warm neck as she whispered promises and apologies into ears that would never hear her voice again. Jake Morrison received the call that would change everything while reviewing classified mission briefings in a secure facility 3,000 miles from home. The voice of Meadowbrook's police dispatcher crackled through static as she delivered news that no parent should ever hear. His daughter had been involved in an incident, Thunder was dead, and Emma was in the hospital suffering from severe trauma. The 12-hour journey home became a nightmare of delayed flights and desperate phone calls as Jake pieced together the horrific truth from fragmented reports. Thunder had been shot 3 times by Deputy Ryan Blackwood while walking peacefully with Emma. The official report claimed the bull had charged aggressively at the officers, forcing them to use deadly force to protect public safety. But Jake's military intelligence training immediately identified inconsistencies in the narrative that suggested something far more sinister. When Jake finally arrived at Meadowbrook General Hospital at 2 o'clock the following morning, he found Emma in a catatonic state that his sister-in-law, Dr. Margaret Foster, described as severe psychological shock. The girl who had slowly rebuilt her voice and confidence over the past year had retreated into complete silence, her eyes staring at nothing while her small body trembled with trauma too profound for words. "She won't speak," Dr. Foster explained as they stood outside Emma's room, watching through the window as the girl sat motionless in her hospital bed. "She hasn't said a word since the shooting. The blood work shows elevated stress hormones consistent with severe PTSD, and her brain scans indicate trauma response patterns we typically see in combat veterans." Jake's hands clenched into fists as he absorbed this information, his Delta Force training warring with parental anguish as he struggled to maintain control. Thunder's death was devastating enough, but witnessing Emma's complete psychological collapse ignited a cold fury that threatened to overwhelm his rational judgment. The security footage that Jake obtained through his military contacts told a story that completely contradicted the official police report. Multiple camera angles from neighboring houses showed Thunder standing calmly beside Emma throughout the encounter, never moving aggressively or displaying any threatening behavior. The bull had simply positioned himself between Emma and the deputies, a protective stance that any animal behaviorist would recognize as defensive rather than aggressive. Most damning of all was the audio recording from Mrs. Eleanor Patterson's security system, which captured Blackwood's escalating panic and Webb's failure to intervene. The deputy's own words revealed a mentally unstable officer projecting his childhood trauma onto an innocent animal, while his partner enabled the tragic outcome through willful blindness. Jake's investigation into Blackwood's background revealed a pattern of psychological instability that should have disqualified him from law enforcement service. Military records showed multiple incidents of excessive force against Iraqi civilians, resulting in his dishonorable discharge after a particularly brutal encounter that left 2 innocent farmers hospitalized. The deputy's childhood trauma involving cattle, combined with untreated PTSD from his military service, had created a dangerous individual who should never have been given a badge and weapon. Deputy Marcus Webb's complicity ran deeper than simple partnership loyalty. Jake discovered that Webb had lost his young son in a horseback riding accident that occurred under suspicious circumstances. The boy had been riding a horse that Webb himself had spooked with a car horn during an argument with his ex-wife at the stable. The subsequent investigation had been quietly buried by local authorities, but medical records suggested that Webb's negligence had directly contributed to his son's death. Both deputies had used their authority to project their personal traumas onto Thunder and Emma, transforming their guilt and psychological damage into a crusade against innocent animals and the families who loved them. The anonymous complaints that had built the case against Thunder were traced back to reports filed from Webb's personal computer using various fake names and addresses to create the illusion of community concern. The most shocking revelation came when Jake accessed Blackwood's personnel file through federal law enforcement databases. The deputy had previously served in Jake's own unit during a deployment to Afghanistan, though their paths had never directly crossed. Blackwood had been the soldier court-martialed for beating prisoners and terrorizing civilians, the same man Jake had recommended for discharge after witnessing his sadistic treatment of detainees. Now that same damaged individual had murdered Thunder and traumatized Emma, driven by a toxic combination of childhood fear, military trauma, and recognition of Jake's name from his military service record. The shooting hadn't been a response to perceived threat. It had been an act of psychological warfare against a family Blackwood blamed for his own professional destruction. Jake's federal contacts confirmed that Blackwood had accessed Jake's classified personnel file weeks before the shooting, learning about his Delta Force service record and his role in Blackwood's military discharge. The deputy had deliberately targeted Thunder and Emma as revenge against the officer who had ended his military career, using his law enforcement authority to inflict maximum psychological damage. Armed with this evidence, Jake prepared for a confrontation that would require all of his strategic training. The local sheriff's department had already closed ranks around their officers, accepting Blackwood's fabricated report without investigation. District Attorney Patricia Mills, a longtime friend of Sheriff Thomas Bradley, announced that no charges would be filed against the deputies involved in Thunder's death. The cover-up extended beyond law enforcement into the city government itself. Patricia Hendricks, flush with victory from the livestock ordinance passage, publicly praised the deputies for their heroic action in eliminating a dangerous threat to our children. Mayor Robert Stevens commended Blackwood and Webb for their decisive response to a volatile situation, while City Attorney David Chapman declared the shooting a textbook example of appropriate use of force. But Jake Morrison possessed resources that local authorities couldn't match or manipulate. His Delta Force connections included personnel in military intelligence, federal law enforcement, and congressional oversight committees. The systematic targeting of military families in Meadowbrook, combined with the obvious cover-up of Thunder's murder, attracted attention from federal agencies already investigating patterns of abuse against veteran families across multiple states. FBI Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez arrived in Meadowbrook 48 hours after Thunder's death, her presence triggering panic among local officials who hadn't anticipated federal scrutiny. Her preliminary investigation immediately identified inconsistencies in the police report that suggested criminal misconduct, while her interviews with witnesses contradicted every element of Blackwood's official narrative. The breakthrough came when Jake presented Agent Rodriguez with communication intercepts showing coordination between Blackwood, Webb, and city officials in manufacturing evidence against Thunder. Military intelligence assets had been monitoring Blackwood's communications as part of a broader investigation into extremist infiltration of law enforcement, inadvertently capturing his conspiracy against the Morrison family. Text messages between the deputies revealed their premeditation in planning Thunder's destruction, with Blackwood specifically referencing his desire for payback against that Delta Force bastard who ruined my career. Webb's responses showed his willingness to support any action that would eliminate Thunder and validate his own trauma-driven beliefs about animal dangers. The federal investigation expanded rapidly as Agent Rodriguez uncovered evidence of a broader pattern targeting military families throughout the region. Blackwood and Webb had been part of an informal network of law enforcement officers who shared extremist views about minority veterans and their families. Thunder's murder was just the most visible example of systematic harassment designed to drive undesirable families out of affluent communities. City officials who had supported the livestock ordinance found themselves under federal scrutiny as their communications revealed coordination with the deputies in manufacturing complaints against Thunder. Patricia Hendricks's campaign against Thunder was exposed as part of a larger effort to maintain racial and economic homogeneity in Meadowbrook, using animal safety as a pretext for discrimination against military families. The medical evidence proved particularly damaging to the officials' claims. Thunder's autopsy revealed no signs of aggression or stress in the moments before his death. His stomach contained his usual afternoon feeding, his stress hormone levels were normal, and his body position at death confirmed that he had been standing calmly when shot. The veterinary pathologist's report described Thunder's wounds as execution-style shots that indicated deliberate killing rather than defensive action. Emma's psychological evaluation provided further evidence of the shooting's traumatic impact. Dr. Foster's report detailed how witnessing Thunder's murder had triggered a complete regression in Emma's grief recovery, undoing months of therapeutic progress and potentially causing permanent psychological damage. The child who had slowly emerged from her mother's death had been thrust back into a darkness that might never lift. As federal agents arrested Blackwood and Webb on charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and animal cruelty, the community that had supported their actions began to fracture under the weight of exposed lies and federal oversight. The same neighbors who had applauded Thunder's death found themselves under investigation for providing false testimony and participating in the conspiracy against the Morrison family. Jake Morrison watched these developments unfold with grim satisfaction, but his primary focus remained on Emma's recovery from trauma that threatened to destroy everything Thunder had helped her rebuild. The gentle bull's death had accomplished the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of eliminating a threat, it had created a federal case that would expose the corruption and hatred underlying Meadowbrook's affluent facade. Thunder's murder would not go unpunished, but no amount of justice could restore the innocent life that had been stolen or heal the wounds inflicted on a child whose only crime had been loving a gentle giant in a world too small for such pure affection. 6 months after Thunder's death, Emma Morrison spoke her first words since that terrible afternoon. She was sitting in the pasture where Thunder used to graze, her small hands gently stroking the soft muzzle of Hope, a young Brahmin calf that Dr. Jennifer Walsh had carefully selected as a potential companion for Emma's healing journey. "He looks like Thunder when he was little," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of months of silence finally broken. Jake Morrison, who had been watching from the porch with tears in his eyes, felt something loosen in his chest that had been locked tight since the shooting. The federal investigation had concluded with devastating consequences for those responsible. Deputy Ryan Blackwood was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to civil rights violations, conspiracy, and animal cruelty charges. His psychological evaluation revealed severe PTSD and childhood trauma that had never been properly treated, but the court determined that his position of authority made his crimes particularly heinous. Deputy Marcus Webb received a 6-year sentence for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation with federal investigators had reduced his potential punishment. His testimony revealed the full extent of the campaign against Thunder, including the fabricated complaints and coordinated effort to create a false narrative of escalating aggression. Webb's breakdown on the witness stand, where he confessed his guilt over his own son's death and his projection of that trauma onto Emma and Thunder, provided closure for many in the community. The civil lawsuit that Jake filed against Meadowbrook and its officials resulted in a $2.3 million settlement, with funds designated specifically for trauma treatment and animal therapy programs. More importantly, the case led to the passage of Thunder's Law by the Texas legislature, providing comprehensive protections for certified therapy animals and establishing strict penalties for officials who abuse their authority to target such programs. Patricia Hendricks faced her own reckoning when federal investigators discovered that her campaign against Thunder had been funded by a consortium of wealthy residents seeking to maintain the community's demographic composition. Her nonprofit organization, the Meadowbrook Parent Safety Coalition, was revealed to be a front for discriminatory practices targeting military families and minorities. Stripped of her leadership positions and facing civil rights lawsuits, she quietly relocated to another state. Mayor Robert Stevens and City Attorney David Chapman were forced to resign when their communications revealed coordination with the deputies in manufacturing evidence against Thunder. The city council that had voted to uphold the livestock ordinance was dissolved, with new elections bringing in representatives committed to preventing future discrimination against therapy animal programs. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's vindication was complete when the federal investigation revealed that the complaints against her professional conduct had been orchestrated by the same network that targeted Thunder. Her therapy animal program, once threatened with closure, received federal funding to expand services throughout the region. She became a national advocate for animal-assisted therapy, using Thunder's story to educate communities about the life-saving bonds between children and their animal companions. The memorial statue erected in Meadowbrook's town square depicted Thunder and Emma together, the massive bull standing protectively beside the small girl with an inscription that read, "In memory of Thunder, whose gentle spirit taught us that love transcends size, species, and hatred. May his legacy inspire compassion in all who pass this way." Emma's healing progressed slowly but steadily under Dr. Margaret Foster's careful guidance. The specialized trauma therapy focused on helping Emma process not just Thunder's death, but her deeper grief over losing her mother and her fear of forming new attachments that might be torn away. Hope's presence provided a bridge between devastation and recovery, allowing Emma to experience love again without betraying Thunder's memory. Hope isn't replacing Thunder, Emma explained to her father one evening as they watched the young calf explore his new home. Thunder taught me how to love, and now I can share that love with Hope. It's like Thunder's gift keeps growing. Jake Morrison's decision to take early retirement from Delta Force surprised no one who witnessed his dedication to Emma's recovery. The decorated soldier who had served his country with distinction chose to serve his daughter instead, recognizing that she needed his presence more than the military needed his skills. His security consulting business, operated from their Meadowbrook ranch, allowed him to provide for Emma while remaining available for every therapy session and milestone in her healing. The community's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable outcome of Thunder's tragedy. Neighbor, who had remained silent during the campaign against Thunder, stepped forward to support Emma's recovery, organizing fundraisers for therapy programs and volunteering at Dr. Walsh's expanded facility. The same streets where Thunder had been murdered became pathways of reconciliation as residents worked to rebuild trust and understanding. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose security system had captured crucial evidence of the shooting, became one of Emma's strongest advocates. The elderly woman's daily visits to share tea and stories about her own childhood helped Emma rebuild her connection to the community that Thunder had loved, despite its ultimate betrayal of him. The federal oversight that continued for 2 years ensured that Meadowbrook's law enforcement and city government operated under strict scrutiny designed to prevent future discrimination. Officer Thomas Parker, the young deputy who had tried to report Blackwood's erratic behavior, was promoted to detective and tasked with community relations, helping to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the families they served. Emma's 13th birthday celebration took place in the pasture where Thunder used to graze, with Hope wearing a special halter decorated with flowers that Emma had braided herself. The guest list included Dr. Walsh, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of children from surrounding communities who participated in therapy animal programs inspired by Thunder's story. As Emma blew out her birthday candles, she made a wish that she shared with everyone present. I wish that no other child has to lose their best friend the way I lost Thunder, and I wish that Hope and I can help other kids the way Thunder helped me. The Thunder Fund Scholarship Program, established with proceeds from the civil settlement, began awarding grants to veterinary students committed to animal-assisted therapy. The first recipient was Emma herself, who announced her intention to become a veterinarian specializing in therapy animals when she graduated from high school. Standing in the evening light with Hope beside her and her father's hand on her shoulder, Emma Morrison represented something more than a survivor of trauma. She embodied the possibility of healing, the power of love to transcend loss, and the hope that Thunder's gentle spirit would continue touching lives long after his tragic death. The gentle giant who had saved a grieving child from despair had, through his death, saved an entire community from its own capacity for hatred and fear. In losing Thunder, Emma had found her voice, her purpose, and her path forward into a future where love, not fear, would guide her steps. Thunder's legacy lived on in every child who found comfort in the presence of a therapy animal, in every law that protected such bonds, and in the heart of a young girl who learned that the greatest tribute to love lost is love shared. In our twilight years, we've witnessed America's evolving landscape, its triumphs and its failures, promises of justice too often unfulfilled, and systems that sometimes protect power rather than people. Emma Morrison's story reminds us that hope persists even in our darkest moments, that love transcends loss, and that one person's courage can transform an entire community. Like many of our generation who fought battles both abroad and at home, Commander Morrison understood that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in perseverance. His struggle echoes our own experiences with institutions that resist change and the painful lessons we've learned about choosing our battles wisely. Yet his ultimate victory, and Emma's healing, affirms what we've always known, that love for our children, our communities, and our ideals sustains us through any darkness. As we watch younger generations navigate these same waters, let us share this wisdom. True justice heals rather than harms, builds rather than destroys, and ultimately allows wounded hearts like Emma's to find their way back to joy. This is our legacy to them, not perfect solutions, but the unshakable belief that tomorrow can be better than today, that gentle souls like thunder live on through the love they inspire. What moment in your own life taught you that love can triumph over loss? Have you witnessed how one person's courage changed an entire community? Share your thoughts below. Your stories matter and inspire others in our generation who understand that hope and healing are always possible.